All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about putting a handle onto this cup that will become a mug. Right now, again, it's really nice and firm, leather hard. This is a really good time to attach things, to make things not want to fall off so you can really firmly attach them. It'll help slow down cracking and things like that. Um, and it'll help cause things not want to warp or sag or anything like this. Because if this was really wet still, and I tried to attach something, it would cause the piece to warp, maybe sag, depending on how big the handle is, things like that. So I'm going to put a handle on this. I'm going to think about the size of the cup. This is kind of a taller cup. So I want to think about how many fingers might need to be used for that, whether it's 1 finger, 2 fingers, 3 fingers, 4 fingers. 4 fingers just visually might be a little big for this cup. So maybe I'll try and go in the 2 to 3 range. So I'm going to kind of think about how I can make a handle. Oftentimes I'll see people, especially early in the beginning class, when I just sort of roll out a coil like so, and then cut it here, and sort of bend this tube into a handle, and sort of just kind of slap it onto the side here. So that's not going to look very good. This all round coil is not going to be very comfortable. And it just doesn't look like it really fits. So we can talk a little bit more about how to make a better handle, because this kind of, not only did it just crack, but this round tube, again, this tube shape's not going to be very comfortable. Is it going to fit this form? No. Are there forms that it could fit? Maybe. But again, that's not really the shape of it, this sort of C shape. So I'm going to take this clay again and rework it. I'm going to dab just a little bit of water in my hands so that it gets softer. I'm not adding tons, just a little bit right there. I don't want the clay so wet that it sticks into my hands. I just want it to be a little wetter, a little bit more pliable for something like this, since I'm going to put a bend on it. The same idea is starting as I'm just going to roll out a coil. One of the tricks with handles is making sure they're not too thick, making sure they're not too thin. Some of that so that they're not too heavy, so they don't crack. But you also visually don't want them to not look very good. So if they get too thick, they're not going to look good. Too thin, they're just going to look weak, and people aren't going to want to use them. So what's the magic size? There's no magic size. Again, it depends on how big of a cup you're attaching to, how many fingers you want to use. A lot of it's just visual, And again, that's why I had you look at some of those resource images to get you kind of feeling some of that visual language. So I've just got this coil, and now instead of using it round like this, I'm just going to tap it down onto my table a little bit. And what that's going to do is that's going to give me a flat side and a round side. Round side can make a really nice visual statement on the outside of something, but this flat side on the inside is going to be much more comfortable to actually use. If you think about how your index finger is going to be on the top of something that's flat kind of matches this shape more rather than something pointed or round. And then I can also, if I want to, I can kind of pinch this down. If I want to make it thinner or maybe a little bit wider. And even still, I can put a spine on this if I want the spine on the outside of my handle. The outside of the handle you can get a little bit more away with. Comfort's not necessarily a huge factor. So I was pressing on that and pinching on that, so you notice that as I did that, there's a little bit of texture left. I like a little bit of texture. I've got a little bit of texture on the outside of this mug. But if it's really, the surface texture is really off, you can always go back with a rib, maybe put a little bit of water down, and sort of smooth this out. What this is doing, it's not only smoothing it, but it's what's called compressing. Compressing is a really important part as we work with clay. It's going to make it stronger. So there, nice and compressed. And again, you know, this is a lot of clay here. I don't need all of this. So I'm gonna cut off what I think I need. I'm always gonna cut something like this a little bit bigger than it needs to be. So right now this is, you know, a fairly soft piece of clay, but I wanna bend this into a really nice curve. And so if I just bend this right away, it's gonna break. And so what I'm gonna do instead, I've got a little piece of plastic here. I'm just gonna lay that on top. Lay that on top like so. So that's really inside of there. It's not inside, but you can see the underside is exposed. It's just really connected to the top there. And now I can just bend this as much as I want. It's hard to see with the plastic, but I can really bend this and it's not gonna wanna crack. So now I can take my plastic off and be able to see what the outcome was. So now I have this bent into a much nicer handle shape. And you can see it didn't crack. Maybe there's some stress crack here and there, but that plastic on top of there really kind of helps it to not want to crack, and that's really important. So now I can go ahead and start thinking about attaching this. So again, when I made this similar to those cups, you know, there's very little water. So this could be attached right now. It's pretty stiff. It's not very floppy. If your handle's very soft or very wet, I would suggest you setting it aside and letting it get to that leather hard stage. But mine's pretty much ready, so I'm going to think about where I can put this. Over here on the side. And before I start attaching it, I'm going to go ahead and grab, I'm going to use an X-Acto tool, but if a needle tool or something like that would work too. Or even a pencil, I guess. But I'm just trying to outline into the clay where this handle's getting attached. And why I have to do this, because I can't just stick this on there and hope for the best. You know, if I just stick this here, obviously it's going to fall off. So I have to do a little prep surface, if you can see where I've got that marked up here at the top and down here at the bottom. So I've got my water, and I'm just going to moisten that surface right in those two marks that I've outlined. Sort of just kind of back and forth. Again, I'm not putting an exaggerated amount of water on here. It's just right in that spot. I'm just kind of rubbing it in to just kind of reactivate that surface, get a little bit softer. Because leather hard clay doesn't necessarily want clay to stick to it that's wet or fresh, or even leather hard. So we kind of have to, you know, force it to want to do that. And so now I need to score the surface. And I can do that in a couple of different ways. Again, there's my two spots. You know, I can do that with my needle tool. If you have a fork, this can become a little bit quicker because it's like 4 tools in one. And I'm going to just dab a little bit more water on there while I deal with the handle. Again, just to keep that hydrated, keep it sticky. So now the same idea with this handle. I'm gonna rub water in this area, rub area in this area. And now I can go ahead and place my ends on those scored parts. I'm just going to very firmly but gently squeeze the handle connection into the mug. And while I'm squeezing with the mug, I'm pushing in from the outside, so I have pressure from both directions. So as I got that connected, kind of squeezed on there really well, it's good to squeeze it and sort of shake a little bit to make sure that you're kind of locking both those areas in. And so while we scratch that surface, we talk about hydrating, moistening the surface makes it more softer and more eager to stick together when they're both kind of a little softer there on the end. But then we score it because if we just do 2 flat pieces together, you know, that comes apart really easily. You know, pulling my hands apart becomes really, you know, if someone was here, they could just pull them apart no problem, right? There's not much strength there to keeping these together. But once I lock my fingers together, it becomes a lot stronger of a bond trying to get my hands apart. And so that's the idea of scoring the surface like that. And we try and almost like cross hatch it to create this locking mechanism. So as those go together and then we kind of squish them together, it really tries to tighten that bond. Because naturally clay is just going to want to sort of separate apart. So it's important that we adhere these really well, so they stay on, so they don't crack, and all those things. So, and then I've got that attached, if you can see. You know, I've got a little bit of goopiness from that water and kind of slip that was created. So I'm just going to grab you know, one of my wooden knife tools. I'm going to put a little bit of water on it just to kind of, what's it called? You know, hydrate the end. And I'm just going to take it and sort of draw around or carve around that connection point. And what this does is it's going to clean up all those little boogers, but it's also going to help, again, kind of compress that seam. You know, the more we compress it now, again, the less it'll want to crack later. You know, we've got a decision to make here. You know, even though I've compressed this kind of hard line in here, and this still needs a little bit more cleanup, but we can do a couple of different things. You know, I like a hard division between the handle and the mug, but if you like, you know, you could blend this handle in really well to where it looked like all one thing. That's kind of up to you. So I've got this kind of boogeriness down here, and I can just kind of, again, a little water on my finger and just sort of roll over this to clean that up. And if I got a little tight spot like inside of this handle down at the bottom that I can't get into, I can just use a little paintbrush. Okay, so now we've got a handle on here and it's about ready to go. One more thing I want to think about is, you know, so again, we're in the grainware stage. This is now in the leather hard stage. As it sits and dries, it's going to enter what's called the bone dry phase, where it's got no moisture left in it. And once it hits bone dry, we can put it inside of a kiln. You know, that's going to take a few days past when these are due, and then they're going to sit in the kiln for about 3 days, and then they'll unload. You know, so it might be another week or so before we see these pieces again. So what does that mean? It's going to be hard to remember what we made. It's going to be hard for other people to remember what they made. So it's really important that we put some identification on here as far as our name, our initials, something like that, because we're going to have a whole bunch of cups in there. And we want to make sure that we're getting the right cups to the right people. I'm not going to know what you made. And so very simply, you know, I can just write on the bottom my name, my initials, kind of what have you. You know, I'm going to use this, again, this wooden knife tool. It makes a really nice mark for writing. Again, a lot of people tend to want to use the needle tool. The needle tool does a horrible job. So I'm going to highly recommend that you use this tool. And I'm just going to write Adam on the bottom. And again, all those little boogers are made, and I can just kind of rub those off and just reinforce some of those lines to make sure they didn't fill in with those boogers. Okay. And then when we get to glazing, we can talk about how we can do different things to highlight that. That's a little hard to read right now, but I'm going to say